Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Rossmaneth. I'm the park biologist at Jonathan Dickinson State Park, and today we're recording a video about chainsaw safety and operations, covering the division's, the Florida Park Service's safety protocols. So I'm going to do the introduction and chainsaw parts, some general safety procedures. Got two other folks, Jeff Bach from District 5 office, park or district biologist. He's going to cover felling and some forces of the chainsaw, reactive forces of a chainsaw. And Miranda Cunningham is going to talk about limbing and bucking and introduce maintenance of a chainsaw. She is also a District 5 biologist. So the main objective for this course is that everybody that uses a chainsaw will operate the chainsaw safely. That is what we're trying to do here. And we're going to go over the Division of Rec and Parks standards of operating a chainsaw, what those are. And I just also mentioned that the course is foundational. So there's a lot to using a chainsaw, more advanced techniques, other things that you can look at that we aren't going to cover today. And just know that using a chainsaw is an experiential thing. We can talk about it all day, but you're not going to get good at using a chainsaw until you operate it and have lots of experience with it. So the schedule we have, we're putting this video together because of COVID, essentially. We're trying to not be in the classroom with a bunch of people for an extended period of time. So instead of doing the classroom, we're doing this video. And that follows the guidelines for this course. And so that's one portion. Then the other portion is the field portion. And let's break those down just a little bit. Part one, I'm doing the objectives. I've got some more detailed objectives. We're going to talk about PPE. Really, the most important thing in this course is that you wear proper PPE. We're going to look at the different chainsaw parts and then just general safety. So carrying a chainsaw, fueling a chainsaw, and then situational awareness. Part two will be done by Jeff, as I mentioned. Talk about starting techniques, reactive forces of the saw, and felling. And then part three will be Miranda with bucking and limbing and maintenance and sharpening. So we'll watch this video at your own pace is kind of the goal. And then we'll go in the field. We'll give you a short quiz to ensure that you've gone over the material in the video. Everybody has the same starting point. And then we'll pair off into small groups outdoors and demonstrate cutting, felling, limbing, bucking, look at sharpening, cleanup, and whatever basic maintenance that we need to do. And throughout this, you'll have a chance to ask questions, and we will do our best to answer said questions. So I just want to add something to this is that there's lots of resources out there. So if there's things that I'm talking about today that don't make any sense, which I'm sure is very possible, or Jeff or Miranda, you have tools at your disposal. We have this presentation that can be made available to you. This slide is a picture of a 250 still. It's got great stuff in there as far as operation, safety, basically a lot of the safety guidelines you'll see today that the division has in place is just taken out of this manual. And they're pretty standard. Each chainsaw, though, is different as well. There's also a glossary that has been put together by our safety folks. We'll make sure you get that. And then a diagram of the different parts that we'll talk about in a little bit. There's some sharpening videos. And then there is a infinite amount of knowledge out on YouTube. I call it YouTube University. There's just everything is out there, and not all of it is going to be, necessarily up to our guidelines, but it's a good starting point to learn new techniques or look at techniques in a different way. So we talked about the class objective was for folks to be safe when using a chainsaw. So let's talk about some more specific objectives. So what are the safety requirements for operating a chainsaw? We have a policy, safety job analysis, which basically outlines the things that need to be worn while using a chainsaw, the personal protective equipment, PPE. This training is now required for folks to operate a chainsaw within the Division of Rec and Parks. There's a classroom portion, video, and a field portion. And then there's some general safety measures, things to look out for that I'll be talking about here in just a minute. And the goal here is to make sure folks have a basic knowledge of the chainsaw parts, maintaining and making sure that a chainsaw is operating in a safe way, and then actually operating a chainsaw in a safe way. So we'll demonstrate those basic skills again in the field. Bucking and limbing, felling, and then we'll take the chainsaw apart and put it back together again. Just is the basic skill for operating a chainsaw. So safety first is the goal in the various things that you might have to do with a chainsaw. The slide has a picture of this. Gotta find my cursor. There we go. This first picture, you might be in a situation where you have a tree on fire and a wildfire, prescribed fire, and power lines in the background. How do you deal with that situation safely? Here we have a picture of Rich cutting a tree that's fallen down in the river. We need to regain access. How do you navigate this safely? And we might have another situation where we're killing Lygodium and we need to cut that line off this tree. So there are lots of different applications for a chainsaw, but we always need to wear our minimum PPE. So we have the helmet, and in this picture we have a helmet that has 3 components. So there's 6 pieces of PPE, and 3 of those are on this helmet. And so just to show you this a little bit better maybe than the picture is, so we have the hard hat portion. We have some eye protection here. You can maybe see the mesh, stop those chips and other things from coming in your going into your eyeballs, limbs poking you in the face, that sort of thing. And then you've got hearing protection attached to the helmet here. The eyes and the ears, those you can have different versions of those: safety glasses, safety goggles. It might look differently. You might mix and match. Doesn't matter. But some basic eye protection And then what's nice about the ear protection on that helmet is it really reduces a bunch of noise that the foam uh, earplugs don't do as good of a job on. So there's options out there. So that's 3 of the 6 items are related to your head. And then going down the body, we have to wear gloves. The chainsaw chaps, which they're going to be really hot. But the idea here is that there's a nylon filament or a bunch of little filaments in there, and they will bind up the sprocket if you nick the chaps with your chainsaw. And we'll talk about the sprocket and the different parts here in a second. But the idea is that any sort of catastrophic cut on your leg, which by the way we'll see I think in the next slide, so just prepare yourself for that. Any sort of catastrophic cut on your leg will be minimized as far as the damage, as much as possible. So what's also kind of cool about chaps is that it's got some pockets for wedges, for the T-tool, the scrunch, and different things you might be carrying around. And then lastly is just you need some sort of work boot. I don't know that there's a specific standard other than it can't be open-toed and it can't be sneakers. It's got to be sort of a sturdy boot. Oh, and so here are the pictures. So we can do a lot of damage with this chain that is rotating really fast, and that's why we have all that PPE. I think, you know, there's this slide kind of breaks down the different types of injuries. You can have injuries anywhere on your body with a chainsaw. It can be a very dangerous tool, and these are just, I believe, you know, from the actual saw, not say from the tree or that sort of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But just, you know, I think once you have a chainsaw in your hand, you will get a lot of respect for it really quickly. But just be wary of that tool. Here are a couple pictures of proper PPE on the right. Notice that, so, you know, we've got the boots, we've got the chaps, gloves, hard hat with eyes and ears. And just notice that this person also has long sleeves. You may want to keep those chips off of you if you're doing a lot of chainsawing. This is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but notice also we're kind of standing to the side of the chainsaw. Saw this a couple of slides ago. So if the bar and the chain kick back, at least most of our body is off to the side. So we'll demonstrate that as well. And then on the left, this picture, basically I have no PPE, just wearing regular glasses like I am, which probably won't protect you even from those flying chips. So this is not where to live. This section is about the chainsaw parts, and this will help us understand how the chainsaw works, and when we get to cleaning and maintaining it, taking it apart, this will help bring some of that home. So first of all, we've got 2 different Stihl chainsaws here. We've got a 250 that's taken apart and a 251 that is put together with this sheath on. So the first part that we want to talk about is the actual saw chain, and then the second part is that guide bar that the saw chain fits on. And you'll be able to see in the field there's a groove that fits in. These are the teeth, how the chainsaw cuts. So what we've done with the 250, is we've taken that sprocket cover, which is this thing, off. It fits onto the power head, this part of the chainsaw, with these two bar studs right here. So this goes on over there, the sprocket cover, with these, and it's secured with these two nuts in this case on those bar studs. Between the bar studs on this 250 chainsaw is a side tensioner. So this will give or release tension on the chain. It's attached to the guide bar. Just know, again, this is a side tensioner. On some models, there's a front tensioner. Just have to know your particular chainsaw. So here we've taken off the sprocket cover, the guide bar, and the saw chain. And what we're showing you here, this is the hand guard right here, and we are disengaging the chain brake. This is the chain sprocket, and that drives the chain right here. So chain sprocket, and this is the clutch. Hand guard, which engages or disengages the chain brake. The chain brake is engaged there. So we covered a bunch there. Right. Next thing is, so on this 250 is the chain catcher. So it's this plastic piece here. In some cases they're metal. When and if we have a problem with the chain and it comes off this guide bar, the chain catcher takes all that force onto this piece of plastic versus your leg or your arm or something like that. On different chainsaws, that chain catcher will be in different places. So another part is to start the chainsaw, we've got this pull cord. This is the starter grip right here. Jeff is going to talk to you about the bumper spikes, the dogs right here, these kind of wicked looking things. Then the handlebar is this solid black plastic piece right here. So most of the time I will grip it with my left hand, and what's nice is you can move it to the side. It's got this open configuration where you can kind of change how you grip it. So that's kind of obviously by design, and it's really nice. The hand guard we talked about engages the chain brake. So handlebar, hand guard. Another feature is the gunning marks. So you might be able to see just kind of a raised piece of plastic, a straight line. Those are gunning marks. Again, Jeff will talk about that. The throttle handle is this sort of housing here for your hand, so you can engage the throttle. This is the throttle interlock right here, and you have to engage that to engage the throttle trigger. So throttle interlock, throttle trigger. And that brings us to the on-off switch and the choke. So that's over here. I'm going to move this just a little bit. So here, this is off position. You might be able to see it's 0. The run position, you might be able to see it looks like an I. Then if we engage the interlock and the throttle trigger, it's full choke, half choke, I think. And then we're back to the run position and then the off position. Next up is the air filter cover. So I'm gonna engage the interlock and the throttle trigger, push it onto choke, and then the air filter cover comes off easily, and you can see that this is the air filter here. Behind it is the spark plug boot, and underneath that is the spark plug. We're going to replace that. Oh yeah, we do need that replaced. I want to show you something else there. And then if we go back to the 251, we've got over here, this is the bar oil cap. The bar oil lubricates the chain on the guide bar, which is why I have this piece of cardboard on my desk. And the oiler is right here by this bar stud. And then we also have the fuel cap over here, and that's a 50 parts gas, 1 part oil. That's engine oil, bar oil, 2 different oils. So gas, 50 parts, 1 part engine oil. On the front, underneath the handguard, this is the muffler and spark arrestor right here. So after running this saw for a while, this will be hot, the muffler area. So when we're refueling, we just have to be careful, be mindful that that area is hot, and when we're carrying the chainsaw. And then lastly, on the side here are the carburetor adjustments, and we're not going to get into that into too much detail, but you can look at the manual to see what that does. And that's it for chainsaw parts. Alright, now we're going to talk about general chainsaw safety. So when we're operating the chainsaw, there we go. We're going to talk about safety while carrying the chainsaw, when we're mixing fuel and oil, and then situational awareness, which is probably the most difficult of these concepts because there's a lot to it. Okay, so carrying a chainsaw is pretty straightforward, and like I said, this is all in the manual. That this is where we got this from. So on the slide, you've got so what you don't see on the slide is this chainsaw is actually off, it is not running. And then the other thing that you don't see is that the chain brake is going to be engaged. So those are 2 really important things. We're going to make sure that the scabbard or the sheath is on. So obviously the business end of that chainsaw, the teeth are covered, and we're going to carry the chainsaw backward, keeping in mind that the muffler is kind of on in the middle, in this case on the back of the chainsaw. We just need to make sure that we know that if we've been running, the chainsaw is potentially really hot, and we've got all our PPE on. Maybe we don't need the hearing protection engaged. We could also carry the chainsaw chaps to the side, because those can get snagged pretty easily where the straps are. So but other PPE is going to be on. So what not to do when carrying a chainsaw and what to do, we've got 2 pictures that are good. Carrying the chainsaw backwards, just notice that the sheaths aren't on, and the picture where we don't have our gloves on. And then off to the right, we've got the sharp teeth right by our neck, which is probably not a good place to live. In the top two pictures in the bottom left, and I'm not really sure what the bottom right picture is. the guy with the chaps around his neck. But these are the improper techniques on the right side of the slide. Mixing fuel and oil, you know, we are basically going to follow the same procedures that we would when using any small engines. We're going to again shut the engine off if we've been running it. What might be a little bit different from other fueling situations is this fuel can here, the Dolmar. It's got a fuel tank and it's got a bar chain oil tank. So that might look a little different. The smaller tank is the bar chain oil. The larger tank is the gas and oil mixture. We're wearing all our PPE, eyes. I guess we're not wearing our ear protection. We don't need that. Maybe you should be wearing gloves while filling the bar oil tank. Ideally, you would have the chainsaw on a flat surface. You're not going to be able to move it, and you should think about having some sort of spill pad or something. Inevitably, you're going to have some sort of spill. Little doggy bowl to catch, to put the chainsaw in, basically a Tupperware. And you want to do all this away from any heat sources or open flames, realizing that the muffler could be hot. So if you're in a situation where you've been using the chainsaw for a while, maybe take that break, get a drink of water, and the last thing you do is fuel up the saw. And remember, the fuel is going to be a 50-to-1 gas and oil mix. Just make sure that's correct based on your user manual. That it could be different for different chainsaws. Okay, and then my last slide is the scene safety and situational awareness. So I think number one is that you make sure that you work with a partner. Just in case something happens to the Sawyer or somebody else on the scene, that there are two people for safety. So as far as environmental conditions, and let me just back up here too, while we don't have too much on the screen, this picture was taken at Atlantic Ridge Preserve State Park, just up the road from here. This was in a prescribed fire of somebody, and I can't remember who, cutting a snag that is on fire here in the middle in the softwood, the softwood portion of that South Florida slash pine. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's why I wanted this picture here, real life situation, while we talk about situational awareness. So first off, we're going to make sure that we have solid footing and gripping. So we're not, the classic thing of not to do is we're not going to use a chainsaw standing on the ladder, or standing on the log that's underneath a log that we're trying to cut. We need solid footing so that we don't slip and then that chainsaw comes back at us, potentially cutting us is the main thing. And if you don't have that situation, you would then, it's kind of maybe more of a fire term, you have a Sawyer, you have a swamper. Swamper would help you clear that work area around you, and then maybe as well escape routes to your safety zones while you're felling a tree like we have in the picture here. Another scene safety situational awareness thing, if we're cutting a snag on a prescribed fire or wildfire, what's going on with the tree? Is there fire there? Is that compromising the integrity of that tree. What's the weather like, especially the winds? Are we cutting in a direction where kind of opposite the wind? Are we felling the tree opposite the wind direction? Or is the wind so strong that it's gonna weaken our tree? Maybe there's another day to do this chainsawing. Precipitation, kind of the same thing. Maybe slightly different, but the winds can also bring things down from the canopy of that tree. Precipitation as well. It can bring things off of that tree onto you. You got to be very careful of that. And then the thing that we're probably all very aware of coming out of the summer is, how quickly are we getting fatigued, especially wearing those chainsaw chaps, which are really hot, and potentially those long sleeves and the helmet. All that stuff is going to increase the stress level of your body, and so we'll need to take more breaks and have water, air conditioning available, whatever we need. Another big thing with scene safety is we need to look up, look down, and look all around. So looking up, we talked about a little bit. Things like power lines, being situationally aware. When we fell that tree, is it going to fall onto the power lines, or is it going to fall onto something that falls onto the power lines? How are we going to manage that situation? Vines can alter the fall of a tree. So we might have vines all up in a tree, and we're not sure where that tree is going to go. Maybe we walk away. Maybe we can manage that situation differently. Widowmaker just kind of refers to anything either on that tree or other trees around it, anything aerially that can fall onto you, be it whole sections of that tree, if the tree is weakened, or branches, or trees, or branches next to that tree that you're cutting. So that would be a widow maker. And just know that as you're cutting that tree, the action of the chainsaw is going to vibrate that tree, and anything that's a little bit loose potentially could snap. And then the action, the way the tree will fall as it comes off of that stump shot, which we'll talk about, that's a big jarring motion. Things could get loosened up in the canopy, and things could fall. Which is why you wear your helmet, you have your escape route, and hopefully a safety zone to get to. You're going to look down. Are there any stump holes, any hot, ashy areas that are burning if we're on a prescribed fire, wildfire? What about critters, things like fire ants, or snakes, or wasps, something like that are on the ground that could come get you while your attention is with the chainsaw and maybe up in the air looking at the tree. You need to be very conscious of where that tree is going to lay and what it's going to take out. You're going to have a goal of where you're going to put that tree down and what's going to come flying back at you, if anything. Just being aware of that. And your escape route is going to be 45 degrees to the back of the tree. We'll have a picture of that to get to your safety zone if that's available. Something to hide behind. Making sure that that escape route is clear so you can get out while you're watching that tree fall, walking backwards. So we're going to evaluate the tree. What's the lean on that tree? Is it weakened? We have a picture here of potentially the tree being weakened by fire. Is it hollow? Is it whole? Are there rotten parts? is this thing going to fall in a way that we're not thinking about, because we can't see that it's hollow or rotten. Um, so we need to evaluate that. What about the branches? Are they going to fall on us while we're cutting, or what are they going to do as the tree lays down? And what is the lay of that tree? What's it going to hit as it falls? Fatigue is a big issue. If we're doing this for extended period of time, you know, or is our perception going to be altered by being hot and tired? And the answer is yes. And then I added also just the scene safety, or to the scene safety, making sure that that person that you're working with, that swamper, is at least 2 tree lengths away. You don't want to be anywhere near that tree as that tree is falling, because again, it could hit things that you weren't thinking about. So 2 tree lengths away is a good minimum to be away. And a lot of times that's difficult to manage, but that person can also talk to other people if it's in a visitor area. And that, I think, is scene safety and situational awareness.
There are 2 proper starting techniques. One is on the ground and is the most controlled and therefore the best for beginners. And method 2 is between the legs. Using both approaches, you always should have the chain brake engaged. When holding the saw, you must use a closed hand. The power head of the saw should always be kept at or below shoulder height, and you never want to cut using the saw above your head or shoulders. You want to hold the saw at a comfortable position, and when possible, let the saw take on the weight. You also want to create an area around you where nothing is intended to be cut, whether that is another sawyer or a swamper. This is referred to as the blood bubble. Chainsaw operation should only be done from the ground or another approved apparatus, such as a bucket truck with a safety harness. Reactive forces are when the power head and the saw are driven against the direction of the chain moving while cutting. The saw can pull forward when you're cutting with the bottom side of the bar. The saw grabs and creates tendency to pull or yank the power head and the operator into the cut. Or the saw will push backwards, cutting with the top side of the bar. It catches and creates tendency to push or thrust the power head and operator backward. There is also kickback, which is an upward and very strong reaction force that occurs when the tip, the nose or top front end of the bar, and the chain strikes an object and the bar guide is thrust back uncontrollably. Another method which can create a kickback is closing of the kerf or pinching of the chain while cutting. Some other things can contribute to kickback, including a dull chain, a loose chain, improper depth gauges, and improper tooth angles. The larger the bar tip, the more common the kickback will be. The number one way to avoid kickback is to watch where your bar tip is at all times and make sure to keep it clear from striking objects. Do not cut within the kickback zone of the bar, and position your body to where you're not directly behind the arc of the bar. Never cut above shoulder height, and always maintain control. There are 3 techniques we will be going over today. 1, felling, which is cutting down a standing tree. 2, limbing, basically cutting off limbs of a tree after it has been felled or while it's standing. And 3, bucking, which occurs when the tree is on the ground. You are cutting the tree into sections. When felling a tree, you want to follow the 5-step safe felling plan. Step 1, assess the site. Step 2, assess the tree. Step 3, prepare your work area and sufficient escape routes. Step 4, use correct, safe felling techniques. Step 5, retreat and look up. When assessing the site, you want to ensure there is acceptable access, appropriate egress, and an area for proper footing. Chainsaw operation should only be done from the ground or an approved apparatus such as a bucket truck with a safety harness. You also want to be aware of aerial hazards such as power lines, widowmakers, projectiles. You do not cut within 2 tree lengths of a power line and never assume they are not live. Assume all power lines are active. You also want to be aware of any infrastructure nearby, including buildings, roads, trails, communication lines, gas lines, or water lines, and also the general public. When assessing the tree or performing size-up of the tree, you want to be looking for any structural defects, any signs of decay, fungus, loss of fine branch, sloughing bark, no foliage, embedded foreign objects, fences, nails, climbing spikes, any signs of moisture weeping, and you want to check for soundness. Is the tree solid? This can be determined by striking the tree with a felling axe. You also want to be establishing the lean of the tree, and that is determining where the natural lean of the tree will go. If the tree appears to be straight, then you want to look for determining how much weight the crown has, which side of the tree has more branches or foliage. This is where you will begin the process to determine if and where you will fell the tree. Once you have determined the lean, you want to make sure the path of the falling tree will be clear and that you will have adequate access to the cutting area. You also want to determine your escape routes and your safety zones. You want to look for any aerial hazards, make sure there's no significant obstacles to impede the falling tree, look around your cutting area, and establish your escape routes and safety zones, making sure to walk them so they are clear and free from hazards. To determine your escape routes, they should be at a 45-degree angle opposite of the felling direction of the tree. You also want to walk the escape route before you begin any felling operation. Ensure your escape route is clear of obstacles and hazards before the cutting operation. After establishing the direction and location of the fall and ensuring the cutting area and escape routes are clear of hazards, take your position to where you'll begin cutting from. Align your saw where you want to begin cutting. Look down at the gunning sights to confirm that your cut lines up with where you want the tree to go. As you cut, before and during, you can be checking your gunning sights to ensure, while cutting the felling notch and during the back cut, the tree is going where you intend. After checking the direction of the tree's fall using your gunning sights, you now position your saw to make the first cut in the felling notch. The conventional felling notch is the most commonly used by beginners. Get your saw level and lined up properly, fully engage the throttle, and make your horizontal cut. The first cut of your felling notch should be approximately 1/3 the depth of the tree. After you first cut, check the gunning sight to ensure proper direction is established. Line up your second cut at the intended 45-degree angle. Make your second cut, completing the wedge to be removed. Make sure that both of your cuts line up, and if they don't, clean up any Dutchman. The height of your cut should be determined by the best position for comfort and control of the saw and the sawyer making the cuts. Typically, this will be at waist height, where the saw normally hangs when held in both positions. It is important to clean up any Dutchman to ensure that the tree establishes proper momentum and direction while falling. A swinging Dutchman where one side of the felling notch is cut deeper or notched outside of the intended wedge, compromises the hinge and holding wood, causing the tree to twist to one side as it releases. Dutchman notches, where the two cuts do not align in the same depth, can hinder the tree's momentum from establishing the fall and cause the tree to hang up or not fully release. The tree should be structurally sound at this point, so take your time and make sure to do a proper cleanup to ensure a controlled fall. When making your felling cuts, again, you want to start with the notch or the pie-shaped wedge about 1/3 the depth of the tree. Then you begin to make a flat felling cut through the tree, making sure to leave enough holding wood. Making the felling cut. The felling cut should be at least 1 to 2 inches above the bottom cut. You can also utilize safety wedges to prevent the saw from binding or the tree falling back if necessary. You also want to cut slowly to determine any movement and maximize the control of the fall. First, you make your upper cut. Second, you make your bottom cut to create the wedge. 1 to 2 inches higher, the bottom cut. You then make your felling cut as flat as possible, going about 1/3 of the way into the tree, leaving enough gap or holding wood. That gap or holding wood is also known as the felling hinge, which controls the falling tree. It should be about 1/10 of the tree's diameter. You never want to cut through that hinge. Cutting through the hinge can make the tree fall in the opposite direction, or it could cause loss of control of the tree. Wedging can be a useful tool. While making the felling cut or the back cut, you stop the engine of the saw, use your chain brake, insert a wedge into the opening cut in the trunk until you can pull the chainsaw out easily. You then saw until the chainsaw bar is parallel with the directional notch on the other side of the tree until your hinge is even. Once the hinge width is 1/10 of the tree, remove the saw and drive the wedge. You may need to hammer the felling wedge with your felling axe in place to get the tree to fall.
Here, Harold is clearing his workspace so he can get to the tree to cut it. He's also swamping and then making sure his escape route is clear. Here we're demonstrating the conventional cut, and there are 3 cuts. This one is the bottom or the flat cut. Here Harold is showing us the second cut or the angle cut. And notice the angle and the flat cut come together, and that's going to be in the direction of the fall of the tree, which in this case is also the way that the tree is leaning. Lastly, we have the third cut, the main cut or the felling cut. And notice how the tree pivots on the hinge as it falls. And also notice how Harold moves in a 45-degree direction from the back of the tree down his escape route.
So bucking. What is bucking? It is to cut a tree or log into usable lengths. And before you start any kind of bucking, you want to size up. So you want to walk around your tree or log and try to determine where your pressure is. Bucking is all about pressure. And you're dealing with 2 forces, tension and compression. Tension is pulling things apart, and compression is pushing them together. Here is where your pressure is. And where is your bind? This is where your compression exists. You figure out where your compression is, and you can determine what kind of bind you have. So the top bind is where the compression is on top of the log. And you want to make your first cut on the top no more than a quarter of the way through, and then your second cut on the bottom, and this eventually separates the log. You want to be careful not to cut too far on that first cut because you run the risk of pinching the saw. Bottom bind. This is where the compression's on the bottom. So just the opposite of top bind, you want your first cut to be on the bottom, no more than a quarter of the way through, and then your second cut on the top that eventually separates the log. Once again, when you make that first cut, don't go too deep or you could pinch your saw. Bucking with a side bind. This is pressure that is exerted sideways on the log, and it will often change as you move down the log. Your first cut will be again on the compression side. Here you want to be very mindful of your kerf and not to cut too deep. The second cut will be on the tension side and separate the log. Often, as you move down the log, it will transition to a top or bottom bind. And then bucking with an end bind, this is where the weight compresses down the entire log. It's best to start at the top and work down the log. Use wedges to offset those compressive forces. It's always best if you can start with smaller pieces first as you move down the log. So bucking, kind of the main thing here is start at the end of the tree, cut small pieces first. Trees and logs will often have more than one bind, and they can move as the log moves. And mind your kerf. This can save your saw from being pinched. And then reevaluate. As you move down the log, you want to resize up. As a tree falls, it will often brush other trees, leaving broken live limbs or dead limbs hanging in those surrounding trees and snags. And as a tree settles on the ground, limbs that are supporting its weight can be under varying pressures. So basically, don't limb immediately after felling. Give those overhead hazards time to come down. Give the tree a little bit of time to settle. Go fell another tree, refuel, or simply take a break. But just give things a little bit of time. There are 5 potentials, hazards that you have to be aware of when limbing. The first, we just discussed overhead hazards. Even with time, there can still be overhead hazards that don't come down, and you have to be aware of those. Second are spring pulls. We'll discuss that a little bit further in this presentation. But basically, they're smaller trees that are typically caught under a felled tree, and they're under extreme tension. And then the last 3 have to do with the butt of the tree, which is the part of the trunk that is closest to the stump. The butt can be moved forward as it comes off the stump, and that creates a great deal of back pressure. The second is the butt could twist, which can create sideways pressure on some of those limbs that are supporting the weight. And then if it is completely off the ground, it can create a great deal of tension down the tree stem itself. So limbing. Limbing is very similar to bucking, and it's all about determining where your pressure is. Most limbs that aren't supporting any weight of the tree stem can be cut with the same method as bucking with the bottom vine due to the pressure, the limb pressure and weight forcing down. You want to make a small relief cut on the bottom and then follow through with a top cut. Make sure when you're making that bottom cut not to go too far, as you could pinch the saw. And it might seem easy to use the tip of the bar, but you want to avoid this as it can cause kickback. Limb lock. So what is a limb lock? Basically, when you're cutting a limb under pressure, you can use a limb lock as a way to prevent yourself from being hit by that limb. And you start on the compression side, you make your first cut closest to that tree stem or log, and then you move up the limb a few inches and you make your second cut on the tension side. And that little step, those few inches up the limb, will create a little catch. So when that limb releases, it hits that little catch and prevents the operator from being struck. Spring pulls. So spring pulls are extremely dangerous and should really only be cut by a qualified operator. The most preferred method for cutting a spring pull is you come up from the bottom, you come over from the top of that curve on the spring pull, and where that line, those two lines meet, you come down at a 45-degree angle, and then you want to come on the back side of that tree and slowly at full throttle shave away until you start to see movement. You want to walk away from that tree, and eventually you'll see the outer tree fibers will slowly snap and relieve the tension. Another method is on the outside of that curve to create very small cuts, feathering kind of along that curve, and you'll eventually see the same sort of movement. You walk away and the tension will be relieved. Pole saw safety. So using a pole saw, you want to wear all the same PPE as you would wear when using a chainsaw. So chaps, gloves, ear, eye protection, hard hat, and boots. You want to stand on a flat and stable surface, so no mud, slope, not a ladder, or even a step stool. You want to make sure you're far away from power lines, at the very least 50 feet. Remember, electricity can arc. Plan your escape path. So branches can sometimes fall unexpectedly, and make sure there are no bystanders nearby that can be hit. And then don't stand directly below the branch. I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but it's really important. So rather you want to maintain kind of a 60-degree angle. This is the least tiring position and keeps you a safe distance from the limb. So pruning. When you want to rest that pole saw on the branch, apply only a little pressure. Let the weight do the job. And then just before the end of the cut, you want to kind of release that pressure and don't let the tool fall with the limb. You want to start with lower limbs and then continue up the tree. When you're dealing with long and heavy limbs, start at the end and make 2 or more cuts gradually to relieve the pressure. You always want your final cut to be a smooth cut near the trunk, not completely smooth against the trunk, but along that branch collar. This will help save the tree. So the operation and maintenance of a chainsaw. A properly maintained chainsaw increases safety and productivity. With that being said, read the owner's manual. There's way more information in the owner's manual that I could ever relay in this presentation. But we're going to talk about a few things. First, you want to check the chain tension, the chain brake, and all the bolts and nuts prior to use. You want to check the chain tension and lubrication system for proper function. A proper chain tension helps to ensure long chain life and safer cutting. a chain that is too loose could derail and easily whip back and cut you. A chain that is too tight could bind and wear prematurely. And always remember that through use, chains stretch. So you frequently want to make sure you're checking your tension and adjusting as needed. I suggest every time you refuel, you want to check your chain tension. You also want to have a sharp chain. As a sharp chain will mean safer cutting and more efficient cutting and less work by both you and the saw. You want to have a clean air filter. You always want to check that before use, and definitely as you clean the saw at the end of the day, you want to make sure that air filter is clean. And you can also check the fuel filter at the end of the day. Sharpening. When you need to sharpen a saw, again, read the owner's manual. All the information is in there that you need to effectively sharpen the chain on that saw. A sharp chain will cut quickly, smoothly, and will be safer. You want to wear all your PPE, especially your gloves. Saw teeth, even dull ones, can easily cut your hands. So wear your gloves. If you have the opportunity to use a vice clip, if you're in a shop or something, you can do that to secure the saw. But if you're out in the field, you just want it someplace flat where it's stable and it's not going to flop over on you while you're trying to sharpen it. So one of the most important things that I want to convey with this slide is that there are different file sizes for different chains. When I first started, somebody told me, it doesn't matter what file you use, they work on all the chains. That is not true. You have to make sure you have the right file for that chain, otherwise you're going to mess up the chain. So how to sharpen? You want to position that file comfortably in your hand. Align the file where it fits in the cutting edge of the tooth, that kind of moon face notch. And approximately 10 to 20% of the file will be above the top of the cutting tooth. You want to hold the file at the correct predetermined angle, usually 25 to 30 degrees. A lot of files actually, or a lot of chains actually have a little line that help you kind of determine what the angle is supposed to be. And then you want to just kind of drive that file forward, giving it just a slight twist throughout the motion. Never pull back. I find it easier to just kind of make sure I don't ever pull back. I take the file completely out and start again. You only need about 2 to 3 strokes before it's sharp. Sometimes if you've hit metal or a rock or something, you might need a few more, but usually 2 to 3 will get it done. There are different tools that can help you make sure you keep the right angle, but you can easily learn to be an effective sharpener with just the file itself. You also want to remember that the chain has alternating teeth, so you have to do one set of teeth and then flip the chain and do the other set. The last part is the rakers. That's this little piece that sticks up in front of the moon face, and there is a depth gauge that you can place over the top of that, and anything that sticks above that gauge tool, you have to file down with a flat file. This is probably the thing that is missed most often in sharpening a chain. And with the rakers not at the right depth, the saw doesn't cut as efficiently as it should. So you always want to check those raker to make sure that they are at their appropriate depth. And then the final thing is you want to check your chain tension again. It will probably need to be adjusted. Definitely as chains cool down, they tighten again. So you want to make sure you check that chain tension before you start your operation again.
So just a big thank you to Miranda and Jeff for taking us through felling, limbing, and bucking, the theory. And so this last just 30 seconds, 60 seconds is just kind of where we're going after this. We'll need to set up a field day to go out, and the first thing we're going to do is we'll take a quiz to make sure you ran through this information and that you're retaining some of that theory, and then we're going to do a field demonstration of felling, bucking, limbing, and then y'all will practice that, and then also we'll go to the shop or in the field, look at sharpening and maintenance, taking apart the chainsaw, putting it back together again, all the while emphasizing safety, PPE, and that will then get you certified by Division of Rec and Parks to use a chainsaw for any of your work needs. So that's it, and big shout out to Laura for doing all the video recording. Thank you.